today's video, we're breaking down my process for designing your own original supervillain costumes. If you need a dash of evil in your designs, then keep watching. Hello super friends, and welcome back to another episode of Superhero Saturday, where we talk about the arts of superheroes, storytelling, and so much more. As a professional writer, I have done my fair share of designing costumes and characters and things, which you can see all my advice on this channel. But one thing that seems to be particularly challenging when it really shouldn't be is creating a killer costume for your main bad guy. It should really be super fun, but I think that I just end up having more fun playing with my heroes than I do with my villains. Go figure. One of our fabulous super friends actually commented on a previous video I did on designing superhero costumes and said that the video actually really helped them design their supervillain. So I decided we needed to do a whole video just dedicated to nefarious fashion designs. This is gonna be a blast. Before we get started on the process of designing a supervillain costume, it's important to note that you really should have an idea about what your supervillain is all about before you get started on what they're gonna wear. Knowing who your villain is as a person will help inform your decisions when you're making the costume that they'll be wearing. You wouldn't want to design a whole costume based around the number 4 and then just stick a villain in there that has the powers of a porcupine or something. That might not make sense. Unless her name is Forcupine and she has the powers of 4 porcupines all combined. Ooh. Let's save that idea for later. Remember to check out the other videos on this channel that I've made in the past if you want any help like this with designing your characters or your story or your costumes or whatever. We're all creators here. All right, super friends, I've got 5 steps to follow when you're designing your supervillain costume, and we're gonna go through them step by step together and design a supervillain costume as we go along. Because it's me designing it, I'm going to follow the order that I usually use, but remember the inspiration can strike you anywhere at any point in the process. So remember to take your time and go through these in whatever order feels natural to you. Okay, with all that out of the way, let's get started designing our supervillain costume. Step number 1, or at least step number 1 that I usually follow, is to pick the main colors that your costume is going to revolve around. Again, I'm not really sure why I do this first. It doesn't necessarily make any sense, but I think that for me personally, just having those colors in mind makes for a good foundation. When you're designing a supervillain in particular, it is important to note that most supervillains actually follow the same kind of color schemes. They tend to have a lot of neutral colors, usually very dark, and oftentimes very desaturated colors or unusually vibrant colors. In particular, if you're picking colors for a supervillain, the most popular ones tend to be red, green, orange, and purple. You can totally use any of these colors and they work really well for a lot of supervillain characters as well as superhero characters, but don't be afraid to branch out from that if you want to. When you're picking your colors, you also don't want to get too extreme with too many colors or go too few. So for example, you could just pick a ninja color that's black and go with that, but I like to do 3 main colors. We've got the first color, which is your primary or base color. You have the secondary color, which is your main highlight or accent color, so that you have at least a combination of colors to go with. And then for your third color, you use the least amount, but it's in there just as a highlight or a second accent color. And remember, any of these can be neutral colors like black or white or gray, or you can add those neutral colors on top of them afterward, because if you at least have your base going on for you, black and white are probably gonna end up in there somewhere, even if it's just as line work. Okay, since we got the idea of Forcupine and I'm totally running with this idea, let's go ahead and pick something that's a little bit in the brown area for our base color, because I feel like that would work well with the porcupine look. And then I think I'm feeling the red for an accent color. Yeah, that's nice and vibrant. And then a lot of, villains tend to go with just straight black. So I think we're gonna do black and remembering the white as our accent colors, kind of like just as the defining neutrals. So here we have the combination of red and brown as our main kind of coordination for this character. We might even throw in a slightly brighter brown as well, just to give us a little bit of highlight on, you know, the different types of browns that are in there. So we can see the porcupine spikes that are maybe part of her superpower set. Step number 2 in the supervillain costume design process for me is to create some kind of logo or emblem, some kind of symbol that represents them and that you can put on different things, even just as a label, if not as like a main, you know, symbol on the chest kind of thing to identify them as this particular supervillain. This can be as simple as just layering a few different shapes on top of each other, or picking some kind of like generic numbers or letters that are associated with the supervillain's name and kind of combining them into a little blip thing that they can wear. Try not to overcomplicate your design with too many different small shapes, because you want to make sure that this emblem is something that's easy to replicate if you're going to be drawing it a lot, and that it's easy to scale, so it can be really small or it can be really big. You may also want to pick things for your emblem that have to do with your character's power set or their backstory or their theme. So for example, if your character has, like, for example, spider powers or a spider theme, you might want to pick an emblem that has some element of that spider shape in it so that it makes sense with the character. And remember, you don't have to create a logo or an emblem for your supervillain character. More often than not, superheroes have these kind of logos or emblems because they really want to be recognizable. They want to inspire people and make sure that people know that this hero has saved the day in the past and they can see it and they're gonna do it again. Villains sometimes don't want to go that route. They don't necessarily always need the spotlight. So you don't necessarily have to make one for them. If you want to skip this step of making a logo or emblem for your supervillain character, at least take a moment to think about some kind of consistent style or pattern that you might use in their costume and in their design and in their stuff and things, so that there is some kind of consistent design element throughout the whole process. Even if it's as simple as chevron pattern or stripes or polka dots. And remember, another important part, especially in the logo design element, is that you brainstorm a bunch of different ideas for your logo design. Even if you have something already in your head that you really like and that works really well, it's good to try a few things that are just really different from that, just to see if there's something out there that might spark your inspiration a little bit more or make it a little bit better. Oftentimes, our first ideas are not our best ideas. It usually takes a little bit of refining. So if you give yourself the opportunity to brainstorm, you might come up with something that you like even better than your first gut inspiration. Let's take a look at our porcupine name and see if we can come up with some kind of emblem for it. Okay, I've got a few designs down on the page now, and I think that I like my second idea best over here. I like the idea of having 4 spikes on the back of the 4, because I'm thinking that this supervillain character has the powers of 4 porcupines. I don't know why 4 yet, but maybe her supervillain power is to have hair that has like spikes that she can pull out of it and stab people and throw or something like that. One thing that I want to note for designing this logo is that a step that I usually forget is I tend to put all of the colors from the character design into the logo, when it's actually probably a little bit wiser to use a design that you can simplify to just black and white, like one color. It just makes it easier to apply it in different places and change the colors up every now and then. It just is a little bit more graphic design-y, but you can use as many colors as you want on this step and make it as cool and as different shaped and many varied as you want. Come up with an idea that sings with you and your supervillain character. Now that we've got that done, let's come up with step number 3, which is our costume base. I do have a whole other video on different types of superhero costume designs. There are lots of different categories that you can choose from something that's really traditional and spandexy to something that maybe looks like casual clothes but is actually their costume, to something that is just entirely made out of armor. You can use this in your supervillain designs as well. You can choose something that is either very practical or very impractical and get as dramatic or as refined as you want for your character design. At this point in the process, you can start thinking about adding those colors in and seeing where they might fit in, as well as putting that logo, if you have one, somewhere on that costume. So let's dig in a little bit with our Porcupine character and give her kind of an outline sketch. I think that for her costume, I personally really like the classic spandex style, so I'm kind of gonna go with that, but I think that when we get to the next step, we're gonna add in a few layers that are gonna make this costume really unique and pop. But let's give her a few color basics underneath this line art to kind of keep this going. Yeah, that looks cool. So let's move on to step number 4. And this kind of like all kind of meshes together in the process. Again, if you need to push these steps together, put them out of order or whatever, it's really good because this next step talks all about accessories. What kind of extra elements do we want to layer on top of the base design to make this supervillain costume stand out? We're talking masks, we're talking capes, we're talking boots and belts and buckles, we're talking armor, we're talking weaponry, we're talking, you know, extra battle tactic type things, anything you can think of. Now, when you're talking about supervillains, it seems to me that the trend is either to go really over the top extreme, very dramatic with your supervillains, or to keep it really refined and laid back, because maybe your supervillain doesn't super duper care about what other people think about their costume or their look. They're really just focused on their mission, which is to take over the world or whatever. So for Porcupine, I definitely have the classic mask. I want to get a little bit of like old school superhero flavor in there. I also gave her a belt just because I think that would be cool. But I think the rest of the costume we're going to keep really trimmed back. Maybe not even use the logo very much. Maybe on the belt only. But keep with the theme of spikes. So maybe we can give her some like gloves and gauntlets and types of things that have spike elements on them. So maybe they reflect her superpower and show us a little bit of what she's all about, but don't get too much in the way of her powerhouse, brawling, bang down, drag it out kind of fighting style. And if we put 2 on each side, that adds up to 4, so that's good for her name. And we'll keep the neck of this costume pretty high. I think that that'll keep it simple, and maybe even if it's some kind of protection thing, it'll help, you know, protect her skin from her quills hitting the back of her body. Yeah, I like that. I like that a lot. Okay, so I think we've got the good basic design. So what I'm going to talk about next is step number 5, which is just to redraw, 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 and refine the whole time. At this stage of the process, I really like to draw the character design at least a dozen times and see what happens after I've put in all of that work. What happens after I've given it that much thought and process. Sometimes even drawing the costume from memory a different time might yield some different results, because if you forget something or add something else because you're not trying to copy exactly what you've already done, you might come up with some better or cooler ideas. You'll solidify the aspects of the costume that really define this particular design. And you may end up dropping things that just don't end up proving all that necessary. Also, think about what it might be like to wear this costume in the situations that you're going to put your supervillain in. When they're fighting the hero, is there anything that's going to help them try and win, or that is going to get in their way? If they're working in the lab on some mad science experiments, are they able to be safe with proper protective goggles and gloves and stuff like that, or is that a whole other costume? If they're a big tank design, like I think that Porcupine is going to be, is their costume going to be able to help protect them against scrapes and bruises? Is it some kind of armor, or is it going to be challenging for them to move around and punch stuff in? These are all things that you're going to want to think through when you're designing the character and coming up with that final concept. Nothing is set in stone, really ever, even after you finalize the design. So don't be afraid to experiment and to make really big reaches and to push yourself to go a little bit farther, or even to do something different than you might have expected to come up with in the first place. The creative process is messy, and you need to not be afraid of getting your hands a little dirty. but not like that. I'm not endorsing supervillainy on this channel, okay? And there you have it. There is my process for designing a supervillain costume. And our example of Porcupine, who I think I'm gonna have to find a place for in my book somewhere because this was just too fun. If you've got any other tips and tricks for designing your supervillain costumes, or if you have some other ideas out there that you really like or really don't like, go ahead and pop those down in the comments below and we'll continue the conversation there. I really hope this video was helpful for your design process. If you enjoyed it, go ahead and give us a big thumbs up and subscribe to the channel if you'd like to see more superheroic and storytelling content in the future. And if you want to see my own supervillains and their costumes in action, you can go on over to our website at www.fearless9.com to check out my books and more. Thanks again for watching, Super Friends, and we'll see you next time.